I'm Amanda Steinberg, and my lecture is on Chapter 1, pages 3 through 12. This chapter is basically an introduction. It talks about what the field is really like, why it is useful, and how it got to be what it is today. It talks about specific people and how they contributed to the idea of learning and behavior. The beginning of the text talks about how we don't even realize how long we've been learning for. It gives examples like we walk to class every day, we drive, we know where locations are, where items are in our house. We do those on a daily basis, and we've been learning that since we were young. They say that learning is all based on past experience. It's always happening. The purpose of this chapter was to, one, talk about psychologists and how they came to see experiments with animals. This involves the learning theory. The learning theory was defined as a field that investigates learning and behavior principles by studying animals in the lab. And two, to understand the book and the field's usefulness outside of the lab. The learning theory was launched in the 1880s and 1890s because people were evolving. In the 1600s, science went through a renaissance, and people were getting a new understanding of how things move and interact. They were developing things like better machines and clocks, and people started comparing themselves to these machines and robots and asking themselves questions on how they could be machines and robots. René Descartes was a French philosopher and mathematician who distinguished between the mind and body. He believed that humans are like machines, but only partly. He believed that the mind and body were separate, that the body was an extension of the physical world, a machine that is governed by physical principles like dolls and clockworks, and that the mind was a spiritual, godlike thing that is the source of free will and voluntary behavior. He believed that the mind separates humans from animals. He believed that animals were a pure body without mind governed by mechanical principles. And he also proposed the idea of reflex action. This was defined as a way to explain the body's activity. That for every action of the body, there is a stimulus that makes it happen. For example, if you stick your hand in a fire, you automatically pull it out. Or when you go to the doctor and you get your knee hit with a hammer, your leg will move. He still believed that the mind could interfere and overrule with reflexes. Thomas Hobbes was a philosopher who suggested that human thoughts and actions follow hedonism. Hedonism is the pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain. So he was basically saying that we learn based on things that make us happy. Julien de la Mettrie was a French writer who believed that the body affects the mind. He saw more similarity between human and animals than Descartes. He believed this because he had a fever and he realized that his body does affect his mind. The way he felt did affect the way he thought. He also compared this to alcohol, how alcohol is an outside source that can affect the mind. At the same time all of this was happening, a group of philosophers thought about the things that the mind contained, and they were known as the British Empressists. There were two important people specifically who were John Locke and David Hume. They said that empiricism was the idea of all ideas and knowledge that are built up entirely from experience. So they believed that everything that we learn is based on experience. So Locke believed that the mind at birth is a blank state, and he took more of an atomistic approach, which is consisting or made up of many separate elements. They thought that the mind receives simple sensations and that they are combined to make complex ideas. Hume developed the idea of association, and this is defined as a connection or relation between two things, such as sense impressions, ideas, stimuli, and responses. Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher who is associated with rationalism. Rationalism was defined in the text as the fact that the mind was thought to act on experience with a set of inborn assumptions. He didn't believe that all knowledges come from experience, so he went against what Locke and Hume believed. He believed that things do exist in the mind before experience. This was tested with animals in the lab, and a big study is through biological routes. In the 1800s, physiologists were trying to figure out how reflexes work. And a guy named Ivan Shneevnov was a physiologist from Russia who had studied reflexes. He believed that mental activity was caused by a reflex which was triggered by a stimulus. Charles Darwin was a British biologist, and he believed that life evolved through natural selection. He also believed that the human mind evolved. Early comparative psychologists is defined as primarily British biologists who studied evolution of the mind by inferring the mental activities of animals from their behavior. So this is when animals were tested in the lab, and they made inferences based on the animal's behavior and related it to humans. And C. Lloyd Morgan was best known for Morgan's canon, which is the idea that behavior should be explained by the simplest mental processes possible. So people are still studying the simplest possible explanation of behavior.